mountain lion on the screen. My name is Brent Lyles. I'm executive director of the Mountain Lion Foundation. And first, I just want to say thank you to Kenzie and the rest of the team at the Friends of the Columbia Gorge. I'm excited to hear the presentations from my fellow panelists. It's really an honor to be here. So I'm going to talk about the value of lions to ecosystems, the work of the Mountain Lion Foundation, the life history of lions, a little bit about territoriality, some information about lions in Klickitat County, Washington, and the best ways to stay safe if you come face to face with a lion out there when you're hiking or biking or otherwise recreating in mountain lion country. I want to start with a story, though. I want to start with the story of a mountain lion named Walker. So Walker was born in the western part of South Dakota, likely with a couple of brothers and sisters. He lived with his mama for about a year and a half, likely lost at least some of his brothers and sisters along the way. His mom trained him to hunt, trained him to watch out for other male cats, trained him to watch out for threats like cars and people. Eventually, when he got old enough, likely around 18 months old or so, he decided it was time to head out on his own. And for whatever reason, he decided to head east. And he walked and walked and walked. Walker passed through South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, all the while heading east. And along the way, he crossed hundreds of roads, swam across some rivers, ate some deer, left some signs behind, tracks, cougar poop or scat, the carcasses of deer carefully hidden under bushes, even some hairs where he brushed up against a fence or something thorny. Along the way, a couple of people saw these signs and a couple of others managed to catch a couple of photos. And some people got a little freaked out. He made the news. He appeared on social media, but they never caught him and he kept on going. Now, eventually he traveled through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and did a bit of island hopping to cross over into Canada. He traveled through Canada for just a bit and then crossed back into the US in New York State, eventually finding his way to Connecticut. And Connecticut is where Walker's journey came to a tragic end, 2,000 miles from where his story began. He was killed along a highway in Connecticut. And they know it was the same cat because they matched his DNA to all of those hair and scat samples. Now, this is an amazing story, right? And it's an unusual one just because the distance is so long. So what do we learn from it? First off, we learn something about behavior. Lions will travel really long distances to find a place to live that has food, water, shelter, good habitat, safety, and mates. Second, when a lion shows up in a suburb, for instance, and there's not a breeding population nearby, that's usually a young, dispersing male. And he's looking for territory. And usually he'll just keep on moving. Third, mountain lions do not want to be around people. Think of the thousands, literally thousands of opportunities for this mountain lion to interact with people along the way. And it never did, other than to run away. And finally, Walker's death is a stark reminder that the biggest threat to mountain lions is people. I work at an organization called the Mountain Lion Foundation, and our mission is to ensure that mountain lions survive and flourish in the wild. Now, we do this in three ways. First off, we advocate for protection. So we're working with policymakers at the local, state, federal levels. We make sure that lions are as protected as they can possibly be, so that the benefits that they bring to ecosystems can manifest. The second thing that we do is that we inspire appreciation for mountain lions. Now, lions are indispensable keystone species, but like a lot of top carnivores, mountain lions suffer from some widely held but false and harmful misconceptions. So our educational outreach dispels those myths and helps people to see mountain lions as deserving preservation rather than exploitation. And finally, the third thing is that the Mountain Lion Foundation promotes coexistence. We work in communities across the United States to highlight the fact that living with lions is not just possible, but fairly straightforward. We're working with families, farmers and ranchers, state agency personnel, journalists, rural decision makers, and more. We're helping communities live peacefully among lions, address cougar encounters as they occur, and give mountain lions everything they need to flourish. Now, why do we do this? Now, it's not just because we think mountain lions are super cool, which we most emphatically do. It's because these wild creatures are part of the landscape. They're part of the natural heritage of North and South America, and that heritage is worth protecting. Now, we also do this work because mountain lions are incredibly valuable to ecosystems. Carnivores the carnivores that are at or near the top of the food chain have been shown again and again over the decades to be critically important to the vibrancy and long-term stability of food webs in any environment. So the way that mountain lions affect all of the communities and the food webs around them is often through their kill sites. So a mountain lion will kill a deer and stay there for a few days feeding on it. And lots of other animals will show up to take part in that carcass as well. Now, you may have thought of, I don't know, different kinds of scavengers that might come along, but you may not have thought of this screech owl. I love this photo, a screech owl feasting on a carcass that's been left behind by a mountain lion. And here's an image that shows all of the other things. This is from a scientific paper that came out a couple years ago. It shows all of the other species that lions support and interact with on the landscape. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Mountain lions make ecosystems more resilient. And resiliency is everything when we talk about the growing impacts of the climate crisis on our landscapes. Mountain lions are incredibly important. Now, they have an incredibly large range. Check this out. This is North and South America, and the red is where mountain lions currently live. You can tell that all the way up from the northern parts of Canada, all the way down to the southern tip of South America. And the yellow is where they used to be. So formerly in the continental United States, mountain lions did exist coast to coast. And today it's mostly in the West with one small little population in Florida. So it wouldn't be a talk about mountain lions if I didn't show you some photos of kittens, right? So here is a beautiful little litter of kittens. Mountain lions can live pretty much everywhere throughout North and South America. And prehistorically they did, as I mentioned. They're an incredibly adaptable animal. Think of all those different habitat types. A litter of kittens can include up to 4 animals. 2 is more typical. They're born with their eyes shut and their eyes open after a couple of weeks. And the young are very playful and curious. If you've never had a house cat, you know what kittens can be like. Kittens are raised by their moms, and dads really have little or no role in raising the young. At first, mom will stash away her baby kittens while she hunts, but over time, as they grow, she may start teaching them to hunt and bringing the kittens along with her. Now, for mountain lions, learning to hunt means learning to hunt deer and elk in North America. That seems to be what cougars are best adapted to hunt. And they hunt by stealth, hiding in brush or rocks, and then sneaking up on their prey and suddenly pouncing on them. They're ambush carnivores. When lions are young and inexperienced, or if they're sick, they may take other prey, but the vast majority of mountain lions specialize in catching and eating deer and elk. Now, I love this photo. This is a mom and her 2 kittens. And mountain lions are typically solitary hunters, though, and if you've ever heard someone say, well, cougars hunt in packs, I've seen them. What they've actually seen is a mom with her adult cubs. And I love this photo because can you tell the difference? Can you tell which one's the mom and which ones are the cubs? Because I can't. And by the way, I've got this photo on the calendar behind me. I'll mention the Mountain Lion Foundation's calendar after a little bit. Anyway, so mountain lions grow, and after about 18 months, and it ranges from 14 to 20 months or so, mountain lions will leave their mom and look for their own territory. Males may travel much further than females to establish their own territory. And it's important to note that these young males are a lot like human teenagers. They're bad about doing risky things. They go where it's not safe, like suburbs. They make bad choices about eating things like livestock. And when human-wildlife conflicts happen with mountain lions, chances are that's a young male. And I want to talk about territories now. I mentioned that mountain lions will leave their home to find a new territory. Now, territories vary widely in size depending on food and water availability, the location of other cougars' territories, and barriers like roads and coastlines. A male mountain lion's territory may be 100, even up to 200 square miles. Think about that, 100 square miles. And that territory may include the territories of 1, 2, or several females. Male lions typically, but not always, have territories that are separate and distinct from those of other males. And a female's territory is smaller, and that might typically cover 30 to 70 square miles. So if you think about that, a typical density of adult cougars on the landscape tops out at about 4 lions per 100 square miles, a male and several females. And research bears that out as a maximum density. The other thing is that territories stay very stable over time, and lions tend to defend their territories from other lions, sometimes to the death. Now, this is a map of some territories that were mapped out by a team that works in the Santa Monica Mountains. So this is in Southern California, a little bit northwest of Los Angeles. And you can see that there's overlap between the males and the females, and those territories tend to be pretty distinct. Now, what does all of this territoriality mean? Like, what are the implications of it? First off, when a lion's trying to find a new home, it has to find a territory that's unoccupied. And if it doesn't, it'll typically keep on moving. Even when a mountain lion finds a territory and settles down, by the way, it's still often on the move, because when your territory is over 100 square miles, it takes some traveling to cover the whole thing. You may settle down for a few days while you devour the carcass of a deer that you caught, but otherwise you're often on the move. Also, what territoriality means is that once a mountain lion population stabilizes in an area, it stays stabilized. When biologists talk about this, they use the term self-regulating for mountain lion populations. What that means is that populations won't just keep growing and growing. They stop at a certain point. Now, it's a common misconception, a myth, that mountain lions, quote, need to be hunted to keep them under control. That's just not true. New males and females have to leave because they can't find territories. One more thing that's important. When a lion is removed, there's a power vacuum, especially if it's a male. Several young males will typically move in and compete for that territory. It creates social upheaval. And remember that those males are the young, foolish ones. And that's why the death of one adult, well-established male will often result in more human-wildlife conflicts. Again, it's a very common misconception that the best response to human-wildlife encounter is to get rid of the cougar. Well, if you get rid of it, things can get ugly. And you've just made the community less safe, not more safe. You know, if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation that I'm giving right now, it's this. When an established adult lion is removed, the risk of conflicts with lions will increase. All right, so let's take a look at a community. I want to focus in on Klickitat County. Now, if you're not familiar with it, Klickitat County is in the Columbia Gorge. It's just on the north, it's on the Washington side, and I would say it's maybe 2 or 3 hours east of the Portland area. Klickitat County is a rural county, but then it also has some sort of shishi vacation spots in there as well. So it's an interesting mix of people, an interesting mix of habitat. And unfortunately, Klickitat County is a great example of how fears and misconceptions can shoot off the charts, and things can go horribly wrong for mountain lions and people. So, and unfortunately, a sheriff was elected in Klickitat County, Sheriff Songer, who didn't get the memo about peaceful coexistence with mountain lions. Quite the contrary, in fact. And now I want to pause for a second and give this guy the benefit of the doubt, right? Here's someone who was doing what he thought was the right thing. He put in place what he called a, quote, dangerous wildlife policy. And according to Sheriff Songer and those supporting him, the mere sight or sign of a cougar, just seeing one crossing a road, is reason enough to track them down with hounds and preemptively kill them to eliminate a potential threat. He put together a posse of hound hunters, and I understand that hunting with hounds has been illegal in both Washington and Oregon since the 90s. And he chased down with this posse and killed every lion he could find. And understand the habitat of Klickitat County supports, you know, maybe 50 or 60 territories at most of mature cougars. So since Sheriff Songer began enacting his policy 5 years ago, starting in August of 2019, 60 cougars have been shot in Klickitat County by law enforcement. And the sheriff's office was involved directly or indirectly in at least 40 of these incidents. So the red there shows how many of those incidents were a direct result of this new policy by Sheriff Songer. So what this means is that this fear-based policy of the sheriff more than doubled the number of cougar mortalities. And in so doing, it destabilized the territorial and social structure of the cougars. It destabilized the social structure, causing high rates of cougar immigration and thereby made people and pets and livestock less safe. So what do you do in a situation like this, right? You're the executive director of the Mountain Lion Foundation. Well, the Mountain Lion Foundation has invested time and effort in Klickitat County. We've trained volunteers to promote coexistence. We've supported local efforts to organize around protecting lions. We've done public presentation there. We did a demonstration project with the local school's ag program to show folks from the local community how to lion-proof their livestock enclosures. Now, all of that was great work, and it wasn't enough. The work continues. But this is the kind of on-the-ground effort that it takes, both in Washington and across the country, to ensure mountain lions' survival in a meaningful way. Before I go, I want to share a couple of safety tips with you. If you see a mountain lion, what do you do? So these are the 5 tips that we always pass out and share with people. First off, make yourself big, seem as large as possible. Pick up children, leash pets in. You stand close to the people you're with. You open your jacket, you raise your arms and wave them. Make a lot of noise. You yell, shout, bang on rocks or a water bottle. Make any loud sound that cannot be confused by the lion as the sound of prey, right? Startle it. And act defiant, not afraid. You want to maintain eye contact. You never want to run past or away from a mountain lion. Don't bend over or crouch down. Aggressively wave your arms, throw stones, branches, do not turn away. Slowly create distance, right? Slowly back away. Assess the situation. Consider whether there may be, are you between the lion and its kittens, right? Are you between the lion and its prey? As you back away, try to give that lion some space and so that it has the time and ability to get away. And if you are, if there is contact, right? If you're attacked, fight back. Protect your neck and throat. People have used rocks, jackets, garden tools, tree branches, walking sticks, fanny packs, and even their bare hands to turn away mountain lions. It's important to note here that there is no such thing as 100% safe. So what you do is that you know these tactics, right? And you keep yourself and your pets and your kids as safe as possible. Our website has a ton of safety information for hikers and bikers and folks who have livestock in lion country. And the website's easy to remember. It's just mountainlion.org. I'm going to leave this up just for a second here. If you'd like to be on our mailing list, if you'd like to learn about mountain lions, if you'd like to hear about volunteer opportunities in the Columbia Gorge and elsewhere, just go ahead and scan that QR code. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to Jocelyn. And give me just a second here. I will stop sharing my screen. Everybody got that QR code? There's that calendar, by the way. Sign up soon, get your calendar for 2025. It's a cool one. All right. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass it over to you, Jocelyn. Thanks, y'all. I'll see you in the Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Just get my screen sharing here. That is a gorgeous calendar, a cover photo. I look forward to getting one of those. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I'm going to present on some of our research on the Wolverine and the Cascade red fox in Washington's South Cascade. But first, I want to say a little bit about our organization. So Cascades Carnivore Project we're a conservation and scientific research nonprofit based in Hood River. And our mission is to promote the conservation of montane species and the mountain ecosystems they call home in the Cascade Range. We work with many wildlife and land managers, with universities and with other nonprofit organizations to investigate the conservation issues facing the Cascade Range, and in particular to better understand the ecology of rare carnivores. And our focus over the past 15 years has been on the Wolverine and the Cascade red fox, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And part of our mission is to study and protect these rare carnivores. And part of the protection piece is working with the government agencies that have the mandates to protect the wildlife and the land. And we certainly don't do this protection work alone. These are some of our partners in this work, both governments, state, federal, and tribal, and other conservation organizations and universities, as I mentioned. So let me tell you a little bit about myself real quick here. I'm a wildlife biologist that likes to collect the things that carnivores leave behind and learn about how they are doing in remote and really wild, rugged places. I grew up hiking in the Cascade Mountains from a very young age, and I began studying carnivores in the mid 2000s. Just realized I forgot to put my timer. As Kenzie mentioned, I went to the University of British Columbia where I studied zoology, and then I did my doctoral research at the University of California, Davis, where I focused on the ecology of the Cascade red fox. After getting my bachelor's degree, I went on to study grizzly bears in the Canadian Rockies, and I've worked on grizzly bears and wolverines in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park. I've studied jaguars and ocelots in Belize and worked on another rare fox species, the Sierra Nevada red fox in the Sierra Nevada of California. So these are the two species that really captured my heart when I moved to Hood River in 2005. And they've become much of the focus of our conservation efforts. So the reason that we are interested in these high elevation carnivores is because of their rarity and also a lack of understanding of the threats that are causing them to continue to decline. If rare carnivores are to persist in the Cascades, they require connectivity with other individuals across the landscape and with other populations. And this often means heading north, traversing I-90. This is a photograph that was taken this fall when we flew in the land north of Mount Rainier in the background. And you can see there's really a lot of active logging that still goes on across the Cascade landscape. So another potential threat for carnivores are large wildfires. But how and when wildfires affect these rare carnivores is not well studied, and there's a lot to learn there. This is a photo that I took of the Cougar Creek burn that the fire was in 2015, and this is right along the Yakima Reservation boundary, looking north at Mount Adams. You can see it was a really high severity burn in places. And then coyotes are invading high elevation habitats since their explosion after the eradication of the gray wolf in Washington and much of the West. Coyotes expanded and then they slowly moved up into the mountains. And so it's unclear how this typically low elevation species may be outcompeting rare high elevation species. So let's dive into the Cascade red fox. This is a rare mountain red fox subspecies that occurs in the Cascade Range. And it's pretty cool. It has a stronghold that it goes from Mount Adams to Mount Rainier, so very much in our area. And it inhabits subalpine meadows and the parkland at the top of the tree line, and also the upper mountain forests. Particularly, it prefers the open east slopes of the Cascades where it's able to hunt more successfully. And it's found nowhere else in the world except in Washington's Cascade Range. So mountain red foxes of North America, so the mountain foxes of North America include 3 subspecies that share this unique evolutionary history, which is evidenced in their genetic signatures. So when we look at long sections of their DNA, we can see how they used to all be connected together and they've been separated into different mountain ranges. Collaborators of mine, including my PhD advisor at the University of California and scientists at the Forest Service, they unveiled this really interesting story of the evolutionary past of the mountain foxes in the American West. So red foxes first migrated into North America across the Bering Land Bridge about 300,000 years ago. And they adapted to this cold glacial climate that occurred when the most recent ice age happened, this Wisconsin ice age. So the purple ice sheet pushed the foxes that had migrated into North America south of these latest ice sheets. And this ice age lasted for 100,000 years. And so the foxes presumably adapted to this cold glacial climate. And as the ice sheets receded back to the poles, the foxes migrated upslope into the mountains of the American West. and they became isolated. And there in the mountains, they diverged from all other red foxes. So the Cascade red fox is the one that lives in Washington's Cascades on the volcanoes and other high elevation areas. However, specific locations of their occurrence and details of how which habitats they're associated with, in particular, how they rely upon the upper mountain region as a whole, is fairly unclear. For example, do they forage in the mid-elevation forests, or do they spend most of their time in subalpine meadows or the alpine zone? It's just really not well known. And we need to identify the specific areas in the mountains that this unique carnivore needs to survive if we want to make efforts to recover the species. So I completed this comprehensive analysis of their genetics, their habitat associations, their genetic diversity, and their connectivity in the South Cascades, and learned that while they are really well connected, so foxes that might be born on Mount Adams can go on to disperse to Mount Rainier and vice versa. So the connectivity was good, but their numbers were low and their genetic diversity was extremely low. This led to their listing as an endangered species last year. So that's been helpful for getting increased exposure and interest in protecting and recovering this species. So our research has shifted from the basic ecology and understanding the conservation status of the species, getting a handle on some basic research, to working with our partners to start new research projects that are aimed at understanding what's driving their decline. And we're doing this by looking at the fine scale ecological processes that drive their interactions with coyotes and how climate change is affecting their key prey. So first we need to figure out what is their key prey and then how it might be being affected, the numbers of their prey, by climate change. And to do this, we're using DNA metabarcoding, which is kind of a neat method where we sequence every single fragment of DNA that is in a fox's scat and create diet profiles from thousands of scats. And this gives us a picture of how vulnerable Cascade red foxes are to changes to their habitat that are affected by their prey, and seeing if there's a link to how their prey populations are being affected by climate change. And to get all those thousands of scats, most carnivores use trails. So we search along the trails and collect potential fox scats. And we're actually doing this scat collection across Washington's entire Cascade range for Cascade red foxes, but also for Wolverines and Canada lynx. And our field crews and community science volunteers, like yourself, maybe there's some of you in the audience, have hiked thousands of miles of trails collecting scat samples. And this year we were working with Yakama Nation biologists in the conservation group field lab to collect Cascade red fox scats on the east slopes of the Cascades, where they have a preference for more open habitat. And this partnership expands the work that we've been doing for a long time onto the closed lands of the Yakama Reservation, ensures that the tribe can bring their perspective and their priorities to recovering the Cascade red fox. So it's been pretty fun and pretty neat to start partnering with them. This area here that this photograph is taking, and this is part of the Cougar Creek fire. It went from the south side of Adams around and devastated much of the higher elevations of the Yakama Reservation. And it'll be interesting to understand how this fire affected the Cascade red foxes that have home ranges there. So it's kind of providing this neat natural laboratory to understand the effects of wildfire on Cascade red fox conservation. The Cascade red fox, it has dwindled to a few individuals in several areas across the entire South Cascades, as well as some disparate sightings in the north, or like verifiable reports in the North Cascades. The listing of this rare species as endangered in Washington and also a proposal now to list them federally under the Endangered Species Act has spurred many stakeholders to join the effort to prioritize effective management actions to recover the Cascade red fox. So we have a lot that we're embarking on right now and really looking forward to understanding what is causing their decline and how we can actually act to increase their numbers. So there'll be more talks on that in the future. Now I want to talk about the Wolverine. Just checking my time. So the Wolverines are nearby in Washington's Cascades. They were first, I'm gonna skip ahead here. So in the 90s, Wolverines were thought to have returned to Washington after they were wiped out. So they were eradicated from all of Washington by about the 1920s. And it appeared that by the 1990s, they were slowly making a natural comeback from British Columbia. But you can see in the 90s, there was no reports of Wolverines down in the South. This is Mount Adams here and Mount Rainier, and it's the Indian Heaven Wilderness. But then in the early 2000s, there was a Wolverine detected on Mount Adams by Yakima Nation biologists. And this is the photo here. So this kind of spurred me to wonder what was going on with Wolverines in the area. I'd just come back from studying them in Yellowstone, and I wanted to know if this Wolverine outside their official distribution was part of a remnant population or if it was a long distance disperser. So you can detect Wolverines from camera stations that you set up, but it's really difficult to detect different individual Wolverines, and especially to distinguish males from females. So it's really hard to know how Wolverines are doing when they roam across these very vast, large landscapes, and you don't know if you have one or more individuals and if they are reproducing and setting up a population. So these are just some of the photos from Mount Adams that we documented in the early days from Mount Adams up into the Goat Rocks Wilderness. And you can see they have this, they have this unique, it's called a chest blaze. It's a pattern of white on their throat and on their chest. And some of the photos we could match up and tell it was the same individual, but we just didn't know if we had more than one individual. So in 2016, we shifted gears and we embraced this specialized Wolverine-specific monitoring station that had been developed by a Wolverine expert named Audrey McGowan up in Alaska. And we started deploying these across the South Cascades. So down from Mount Adams up through the Goat Rocks and the wilderness areas on the east, to the east of Mount Rainier, the William O. Douglas and Norse Peak, and then Mount Rainier itself and a little bit north towards Snoqualmie Pass. It's kind of a funny setup. This is what it looks like in the field. We build this wooden structure, we climb the tree, and we attach it at the maximum snow pack in winter. The stations are able to collect hair samples, so we can start identifying Wolverines that may be coming from different areas. We can look at their genetic origins. And we can use the DNA to identify individuals as well. And so this is kind of in practice what the photos look like. So you can see on the left, you have this kind of boxy chest blaze. So it kind of goes down, over, and back. Oh, sorry, back up. And then over here, you see how this is a different individual, has a lot more white on it. So you can see how the station works. You get these different individuals and you start to understand how many individuals make up the population. And one of the coolest things about the station is that if you've seen this red box here, this is a female Wolverine with teats. So this means that she's lactating and she must have currently or have had very recently kits nearby. So it's a huge understanding of the status of the population to be able to detect a female like that. So that female, we nicknamed her Pepper, and we were very lucky to find her den, and I'll show this little video here. So this was 2018, and this was only the third Wolverine den ever found in Washington. And it was also evidence of the first breeding Wolverines south of I-90 in over 100 years. So it was really exciting to see going from this individual on Mount Adams to additional Wolverines just to the north. So this is what the den looked like in May. I won't go into too many, I won't take too long to explain everything, but Wolverines do dig down straight into the snowpack, and they give birth to babies on the ground. They don't dig like a burrow into the ground. And so as it was melting out, the entrance got quite large. And then when we came back in September, this is what the area looked like. So you can see she'd picked this very protected boulder complex to have her kits in. Now, just at the very end of 2019, we detected this new individual at Mount Rainier. And from genetic samples, we learned that she shared the same genetic lineage with Wolverines from the North Cascades. So we look at a section of the mitochondrial DNA, so just another little part of their genome, and it showed that all the Wolverines that we have in the South Cascades have come from the North Cascades. So it was kind of it was a very hopeful to have understood that she had been able to traverse this checkerboard landscape on either side of I-90 and cross the interstate freeway itself, and made it to the safe and protected lands of Mount Rainier. And as I mentioned, she was a female. And in February of 2020, we found out that she was reproducing. So this was the second female reproducing in the South Cascades. We weren't able to find her den, but we did set a camera that turned out to be quite close to it, because we got this video of her kits in 2020. So she had 2 kits in 2020. And we've been able to follow her ever since she first showed up at Mount Rainier. So here's one of her kits in 2022. She had 2 of them in 2022 as well. It's kind of neat that we've been following them from when they're very little kits to this is the same individual Wolverine in the fall. So this was taken in October of 2022. And you can see how fast they go from May to October. And last year in 2023, she actually had triplets, and this is a neat video. So check out, see if you can count them. It happens real quick, but there's 5 Wolverines in this video. So we have the dad and one of the kits, and then the mom and 2 other kits are coming from the left. And so Wolverine fathers do actually interact with their offspring and with their mate. There's not a lot of understanding of exactly their role in reproduction, but they do spend time with their kits, especially when the kits leave their mom after about a year and a half. So we've been slowly shedding light on these interactions through the camera stations that we've set throughout the Cascades. And this is just one more video of the same scene, just seeing the 3 kits on the left there doing funny things. They're super agile climbers, and they're very inquisitive and are always searching around for bait. All right, so I just wanted to end by sharing this video. So some of you may have heard that there was a Wolverine in white salmon this last May. So if I hadn't seen this video, I would have said, I don't think so, but here's the video. Taken on May 24th, and that is indeed a Wolverine, and that is in white salmon itself. So Wolverines are things are happening with Wolverines a little bit, but not as impressive as Brent's mountain lion dispersal story from South Dakota. wolverines go on very long distance movements when they leave their territories as well. And some of you might have heard in March of 2023, there was a wolverine, this wolverine here, photographed on the banks of the Columbia, not so far from Gresham, so very much on the Oregon side and very much in the suburbs of Oregon. It went on to be detected in several locations, including on the Oregon coast. And though we can't pinpoint every single detection to the same individual, a wolverine was accidentally captured by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff on a project, a predator control project for snowy plover study or project. And a genetic sample was taken from that individual and sent to the same lab that we use. And so we cross-referenced all our DNA signatures for wolverines. And it was kind of incredible. But so this wolverine, this is Dale the wolverine. He was born in 2022. And this was a video I took of him that year. Sorry, he was born in 2021. This is in January 2022. And he hung out in Mount Rainier for a while. And then he was the wolverine that showed up in Oregon. So he dispersed out of Mount Rainier and ended up most likely swimming across the Columbia. There was one detection on the west side of Mount Adams this spring in March of 2024 that suggests that might have been him and that might have been his pathway, because we don't know of any other wolverines on Mount Adams currently. So things are happening with wolverines. There's certainly not very many in our area right now, but there's more than there were 20 years ago. And it's sort of with trepidatious hope that with protections in place, they were listed as a threatened species last year, that they may have a thriving future. And thanks so much for listening. There's lots of ways to be involved with our organization. You can volunteer in the field, help us collect scats. We are a small nonprofit, always looking for financial support. So please donate if you're interested. And I'd like to pass this on to Randi now. Thanks so much, everyone. Here you go, Randi.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Fantastic. Yes, my name is Randi Mendoza, and I am the interpretive ranger for the Columbia River Gorge Management Unit for Oregon State Parks. And part of my job, as they mentioned in my bio, is to facilitate experiences for folks that help them connect with nature and wildlife. And one of the cool parts about my job includes engagement with wildlife, and I'm going to get my screen set up here. But there's a lot of information out there regarding wildlife and some of the different interactions and such, and what you do if you encounter, say, a bear, or if you encounter a cougar, or anything such as that. But there's also a lot of variables when you're on the trails, depending on where your location is, depending on the time of year it is. And so there's a lot of things to take into consideration of what you might encounter and how you can best prepare if you're going to encounter something. And one of those pieces is, can you identify what might be in the area, as well as understand what might motivate something to be in the area? And so we've heard from Jocelyn and Brent, and they've talked a little bit about both the wolverines and the foxes and the cougars and such. And sometimes, just something as simple as, a drought can impact where an animal's moving in. But one of the other parts that I often encounter from folks wanting to get outside and explore nature and explore trails is not knowing and not being sure of what to do during encounters, or how to identify what's in the area. Creates a bit of fear. And so providing spaces where folks can come out, like as a group, or where they can meet up with park rangers and other interpretive staff to learn a little bit more in the scene helps a little bit. And so we get into, the details of scat. This is the only job where I can carry something like this around and have people be excited. This is bear scat. I also have raccoon and coyote and cougar. And so we will usually set things up and then go over the anatomy of said critters, looking into, the dynamic of teeth, omnivore versus carnivore, discuss what they eat, discuss, some of their lifestyle patterns throughout the seasons and such. And then, have those conversations around what to do if you should encounter, a cougar, a bear. What do you do if you hear something in the woods? Things to watch out and to listen for. So we're going to do something a little bit different because I was hoping to bring in a little bit of engagement here. I, as an interpreter, like to have hands-on things, and we are in Zoom world. So I'm going to ask you to use a little bit of your imagination because we're going to go through a little bit of the outdoors, and I'm going to try to bring the outdoors into the computer. And so I have several photos of mine from across my time working across Oregon. I've worked in Southern Oregon and Eastern Oregon as well as on the coast. And so that has afforded me many experiences of running into wildlife. Now, you will notice that most of these are actually not carnivores, or they are omnivores. And part of that is that when I'm running into bears or cougars in the woods, I don't always stop and take pictures. I'm usually backing away and getting out of the situation. But I do use these as an example of things to look for because most animals are adept at hiding almost in plain sight, it seems. So I'm going to start out with just a quick story, though. I was at work a few years ago, and this is at the back end of Viento. There are a number of old road grades and railroad grades going around the backside of the park, actually all through the gorge. And so there are some really cool spots in just alongside the historic Highway State Trail. I was on the phone with my manager and I got a little sidetracked talking to him. So I walked back just a little bit further than I anticipated, until at one point I told him to pause for a second because I saw something over in the distance. And so I told him to wait, and I could see something that had a bit of an animal shape. And so if you're looking just a little bit toward the center of the picture, and I'm telling him, like, okay, hold on a second, because I think it's something, but I'm not sure. Now, normally I would advise folks to, if you're not sure, just walk away, but I did keep walking closer to it. And I had my first cat encounter in the gorge. And of course, this is how I ended up with a white stuffed tiger now sitting in my office. And it had a good laugh, but it is one of those things that you never know what you're going to find outside. But one of the things that I always let people know when they're concerned about like hitting the trails and such is that wildlife is actually everywhere. And so we have a chance of encountering any shape, size, form. This particular picture is actually at a rooster rock. The skunk is not spraying the raccoon necessarily. He's letting him know that he's going to have the cheeseburger first, and the raccoon has to wait. But I used to work at State Capitol, State Park in Salem, and we would have coyotes, we would have fox, and we would have raccoons. We had a family of ducks. And every other day, I was usually getting a report of something, and I'd look around all the buildings and the traffic and just marvel at the amount of adaptation most wildlife had coming into an area. Especially during some of the dry seasons, you might have heard of bear sightings or cougar sightings in neighborhoods on the outskirts of town as animals are looking for food or sustenance. Sometimes it occurs in early spring if it's been a hard winter. So one of the things that we try to help people prepare for going in the outdoors is identifying what's around. And so we utilize tracks, we utilize scat. We talk about signs that people can look for. We try to do as much comparing and contrasting as possible. So the cougar, bobcat tracks, and the gray wolf and large dog and coyote, those are not necessarily to size, but they are roughly to scale. And a lot of times, the biggest crossover that we see will be mistaking large dog for cougar. Because most folks don't realize that cougars, cats in general, retract their claws. I always have them compare it to if they have a house cat, take a look at the house cat's tracks and then just think a little bit bigger. And then similarly with bobcats, because it can be a little bit challenging, especially in the spring. We've had a number of cougar kitten sightings that instead turned out to be young bobcats in an area that were just passing through. And then, of course, in Eastern Oregon, the comparison of the potential of a wolf print versus a large dog or a coyote. The coyote print is substantially smaller. And so we try to help folks with identification through mixing and matching, through making comparisons, things that help ingrain it in the memory. And it also helps, we will use little indented tracks so you can actually see the silhouette and you can see the whole paw that the track was made from. The other layer too is that a lot of times critters will use the trails that we're using. A lot of the trails that we have actually established were at one point in time game trails because, sometimes I don't trust mountain goats because they're usually like darting just a little bit on a steeper territory than we are. But animals usually really know they're not trying to find the hardest path. They're trying to find the easiest, safest path themselves unless they're trying to escape. So I've run into folks a lot of times when they've gotten lost in the woods where they found what they thought was a social trail and ended up taking off on a game trail instead. So, but we do encourage people to learn how to identify the scat. Does it look like dog scat? Does it have hair? Does it have, bits of berries in it? These unfortunately aren't colored, but just knowing, having an idea of what you're looking at can help. Once people see the size of bear scat, usually they're quicker to assess, smaller pieces like coyote or cougar as actual coyote or cougar. And then, being aware of, is it omnivore, for example, like with raccoons, or are you looking at perhaps a small fox? And so we do try to do a lot of hands-on. But this is the part where I would really like you to turn on your imaginations. And so when I'm taking a group out onto the trails, we do a lot of observation. And so there's a lot of standing in an area and looking around and seeing, what do you see in the bushes and what time of year is it and what are you smelling? And so part of the reason I do this is because I have encountered critters camouflaged. Now, this particular subject is my house cat. I am owned by a fluffy black cat who loves to hide. I will have moments of feeling watched, as some people have sometimes expressed feeling in the woods, and I will feel watched. And then she enjoys watching me chase around the house for about 20 minutes, calling for her until I finally realize that she's in hiding. And so I'm going to use this example. This is something that I use with when I have groups, tour groups and such, because this is something that's a little bit closer to home. And so we're going to play a little bit of Find the Hidden Cat. And then in this one, this is actually out in Eastern Oregon. But if you look towards the center, you will see a pair of eyes and potentially a pair of ears. And so the only reason that I saw this, and this is zoomed in, I had a 300 millimeter zoom lens, is because it had a fawn with it that darted. I was still a significant distance away, and so I heard the snap of a twig and looked over and saw its head turn. And thankfully, I had my camera with me. I recognized it was a deer. I was able to get the shot. And so this one you can see in the larger yellow circle. It's not the best quality, but you can make out the ears and the eyes and a little bit of the nose. So this one's a little bit tougher. And this one, again, the only reason I got this shot was because it was with a zoom lens. But I was sitting on a bench along a trail also in Southern Oregon. And I had heard something behind me, but I wasn't really, I could hear a twig snap and such. And then I heard it sneeze. And so I turned around, and if you look a little bit, it's a little bit more to the left, but still like in the center horizontal line, you will notice, this is zoomed in a little bit, a little tan face and a nose, and there was a coyote there. Now, again, this is also with the zoom lens, so it's fairly far away, not so much sneaking up on me, but I think that it was aware of that I was there because I packed up and I walked away and I could hear it walking in the opposite direction. But that's one of the important parts of being aware of what your surroundings are, paying attention to things such as, the seasons, if animals are going to be looking for food, sounds. I pay attention to sounds changing, such as squirrels chirping, especially this time of year when they're starting to gather up their food for the winter time. And you'll notice that they kind of chirp, they get a little bit aggressive, when folks are coming through because they think that we want to steal their acorns and we actually don't. And so I'll pay attention to when they get louder in certain areas versus when everything goes silent. And when everything goes silent, I go silent. And if I can't hear something and it seems, not a great situation, that's usually when I'm backing out of an area. So if you are ready, we're going to go take we're going to do a little bit of a sample first. So again, we've got, your typical fluffy black house cat. I've put most of these into a grid, and normally what I would do in a Zoom meeting is I would have folks type into the chat, but I do not have access to the chat. And so I'm going to encourage you to work at home and test your observation skills and see if you can find the hidden black cat. Please pardon my kitchen counter mess. And so just write down your number. I'm going to leave each one up for just, a minute so you can look. I'm going to start with the easy ones and I'm going to work my way through. And so if you're with a friend or your family right now, everybody can take a look and then see who gets it closest. And then if you're by yourself, you can still play. I like to do this where I see if I can actually see the hidden things. And sometimes I get it. And sometimes, I have to berate myself because I don't. So we're going to move forward. So if you did get it, yes, black cat's ears. Black cat's ears are usually one of the big indicators, or her tail. And so if you got the H block, that was a good job. So let's see the next one. I'm going to leave it up for just a minute. There is a critter in there. Not quite a minute. Just take a minute to look around. I will apologize. Most of these are on my cell phone because I find them in passing. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one. This was a great horned owl that was up above Memaloose. And the reason that we knew the great horned owl was there was because it also had little owlets. And one of the little owlets had decided to explore and dropped out of the tree. And so we were assessing if we needed to call in Rowena Wildlife and Rescue, or if we were going to just leave it, because if we leave it, the parent is watching and they will take care of it. So this is the next one. This is a very popular one for us. I'm gonna leave this up for a second. Sometimes you hear these squeaking. And if you said pika, you are correct. That's a really bad photo of one, so we'll get a slightly better one. And I also encourage you, get your own pika. These are the best for snuggling, especially when pikas are so cute. You can just squeeze them. So this one's harder. This one is pretty hard, and I'm going to give you a clue here. This one is a bear. And so it seems like it should be pretty easy. And so I didn't realize that the grid line went through it, but if you got it up in the right-hand corner, it's very hard to see. You can almost barely see the nose through that leaf. But a thing about this bear was this is one that I ran into on the backside of my house. And there's a small trail that goes down just below the ridge. And so I'll sometimes walk down there, and it is along a golf course. And so I look for golf balls, and then there's sometimes huckleberries in there. And so I'll get the huckleberries or the salmon berries. But the thing is that one day I was walking through and I thought that it was actually a turkey because I had seen, the group of turkeys up above, and it was rustling. And so I didn't pay any mind to it. And then the turkey stood up. And as I'm backing away, I was quickly grabbing my camera thinking, oh, I'm going to get a picture of that. But it stood up. Thankfully, it went one way and I went the other way, and we didn't have another interaction after that. I haven't quite seen him since, but we have since found a den down there and some scat. And so we are aware that along that trail, maybe sometimes we don't go out at certain times of day or certain seasons. So that is just a sampling of some of the things we do. We lead guided hikes. We do walkthrough programs in the campground. We will show up usually around on the weekends along the trails. But one of the things I encourage folks, if they really want to get comfortable being outside and with those interactions with creatures, is, be familiar with how to respond if you encounter, say, a bear or a cougar or any other type of wildlife, but also understand the signs of what you're looking for and why an animal might be interacting in an area. So during the late summers, when it's high berry season, berry picking, especially like blackberries, huckleberries, anything is fair game for both humans and animals. Bears like a lot of those more remote areas, but they are not shy about getting into areas that are more populated by people if they are looking for the food. And then similarly with cougars, bobcats, and even coyotes, a lot of times they're looking for spaces that they can stay away from humans, but will be attracted to certain locations based on whether or not food is available or not. So I do encourage you, though, to get outside. There's a lot of these resources, especially if you have family, that are available online. The scats are actually fairly cheap, and they are a good tactile thing for kids to play with, but I also find that adults love these. The skulls are a little bit more expensive, and so I usually don't. These are a little bit usually a little bit harder to get. And then there are a lot of tracks matching games and such, but I'm happy to answer any questions or resources or kind of give a heads up of where some of our programming is going to be over the summer. So if you do have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A. And thank you, Mackenzie. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Keep putting all of your questions for all three speakers into the chat box, and we will go through as many as we can today. All right, our first question is for Brent, and that is, how do coyotes and mountain lions interact?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I mentioned during my talk that the carcasses that mountain lions leave behind are incredibly valuable for many, many, many different species, and coyotes are definitely one of those species. In terms of how they interact on the landscape, there's not a whole lot of data on that. My guess is that they more or less avoid each other. It's there's a lot of value for both types of creature on the landscape.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is for Jocelyn. What's your cute black lab's name, and are you using scat dogs to find the scat?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that is Jasper. That is not my cute black lab. That is Julie's at Field Lab. She trains these dogs, and they are really good at finding many, many different species, many rare carnivores, and even things like orcas. I sent a photo of that photo to my husband, and his response was, "You're not allowed a dog." So he knew I wanted one.
Thank you. Brent, is your organization using radio telemetry or collaring to help monitor lion populations, or are you relying on scat and hair collection?
Well, to be clear, the Mountain Lion Foundation is actually not a research organization. We're the ones who sort of take all of the research that's out there and then translate that into advocacy and education and all of that. But the question is a good one. What kind of research is out there for mountain lions? And the answer is yes, all of the above. GPS collars are the ones that are most commonly used out there, and the technology has come a long way just in the last few years in terms of battery life and connectivity and that kind of thing. And there's also a lot of really interesting genetic work being done like that Jocelyn was describing in terms of different populations and estimating population sizes and how robust genetically a population can be. Certainly connectivity is something that's really important for mountain lions as well. So yes, there's a lot of research, and trail cams too are a really valuable research tool for mountain lions.
Thank you. Jocelyn, how many Cascade red foxes are there and how quickly are they declining?
Mm. That is the big question. So very hard to answer. We do not know. We do not have the answer. We're currently working on that for just the Mount Rainier area. When I did my research for my PhD, which went from Indian Heaven Wilderness, well, it was all that area where the Wolverine map was. So up through the Mount Adams, the Goat Rocks, Mount Rainier, the William O. Douglas, that area, we detected 51 individual foxes. So that was by no means an estimate. That was how many we detected. So there should be a fair number more than that. But what we're finding is that they are not occurring in all the places that the habitat models suggest they do, and that individuals have much larger home ranges than we thought. So, for example, as an actual example, we collected a scat from the south side of Mount Adams at 6,000 feet and another scat from the north side of Mount Adams at 4,000 feet in the winter. And the first one was in the summer. And that was the same individuals. So they're using like vast areas. And so there's just a lot less of them. Their genetic effective population size is just 16 individuals. So that means that they hold the equivalent genetic diversity of the entire population as 16 breeding non-inbred individuals. And so it's just a sign of very low genetic diversity.
Thank you. Brent, how can we prevent the hunting of mountain lions by the sheriff in Klickitat County?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think rather than focusing so much on that county in particular, I just want to talk about the bigger issues of mountain lion hunting. It's our contention at the Mountain Lion Foundation that most states have hunting regulations that are too lax. They allow too much hunting of mountain lion populations, and those decisions are made at the state level, typically by the State Wildlife Commission. They're the ones who will set up those rules for hunting. And, it's all about advocacy. It's all about grassroots organizing and getting involved and paying attention to the decisions that are being made at the state level in your state, and then finding ways to engage. And so, that's something we work on a lot. And in fact, us with a bunch of partners, it wasn't just us, but there were some really positive changes just in the last year in terms of Washington's mountain lion hunting regulations. The hope is that regulations are guided by the science as much as possible. And I want to give a shout out to that commission in Washington State, because they've really done a much better job in the last year or two of letting science guide their decision making. So we're national, right? And so I see mountain lion hunting regulations across the country, and Washington really is pretty far ahead of the curve on it. So we would love for there not to be any hunting of mountain lions, but when mountain lion hunting happens, it needs to be as protective as possible of those mountain lion populations.
Awesome, thank you. Jocelyn, what causes the wolverines to play on the contraption so you can collect the hair and photos?
Yeah, I didn't mention. So all the stations are baited. We went from roadkill deer and elk to a bone attractant, so just a large bone with no meat on it. And so it hangs out of view, and it's what gets the animal to climb out onto the contraption to look up, and then for us to get those photographs. And in the video I showed, we're always getting super creative and trying to figure out how to get as much DNA, as many DNA samples as possible. So you might have noticed in the front there was like a pile of sticks, and we'd put gun brushes, so gun cleaning brushes, just these wire brushes to collect samples. But yeah, they're so naturally curious, like anything and if you think about a wolverine, just its territory could be 1,000 square kilometers, and they are just on the hunt for food year round. And so they will check anything out that's new and different in their territory.
Awesome. Another question for you, Jocelyn, is has there ever been a Wolverine sighting in the Olympic National Park?
No, I hope I'm pretty sure that is a definitive no. I know about most of the Wolverine detections in the West, and yeah, they were never historically in the Olympic Peninsula. But they were down into Oregon and California.
All right, and this question is for all three of you. Beyond protecting habitat for carnivores, is there anything that our viewers can do to ensure that these wonderful species thrive?
I would just say that the Wolverine, the Cascade red fox was listed as an endangered species because the public commented, like in that wildlife commission meeting that Brent was mentioning, the wildlife commission, when there's decisions that are being made, when public comments are submitted, they really do hold a lot of weight because there's not a lot that do get submitted. So that is a really great way to engage policymakers.
Yeah, I would add to that just the promoting coexistence in our day-to-day lives, right? There's those actions of protecting this parcel of land and fighting for this new protection for carnivores at the state level, and all of that is great. On a day-to-day basis, think about messages that you could be sharing on social media and talking to your friends about, right? I mean, the hope over time is that we move more and more towards this worldview of sharing this landscape with the animals and being part of those natural systems, and protecting them and stewarding them more than exploiting them, right? And so that's my hope.
Thank you. This is another question for you, Brent. A big problem with hunting is killing females with young who are left on their own to struggle for food and get in trouble with people. How can this be addressed?
So the question was about mother lions that are killed by a hunter, and even if they get killed on a road or something like that, what happens to their orphan kittens? And that's tough because those kittens, depending on how old they are, likely haven't learned to hunt on their own. And I have seen states try to put rules in place about hunting males versus hunting females, but the reality is that it's really hard to tell the difference between a male and a female mountain lion out in the field. They are really, really similar. And I've talked to scientists who spend every day with these creatures that they say they can't tell the difference unless they get up close to them either. So, I think in general, the answer is, let's reduce hunting in general. Let's put a cap on that hunting. I just want to be clear that there sometimes people talk about mountain lion, sort of managing the mountain lions so that it allows more deer to populate the landscape. And the science says that that does not work. And there aren't really any good scientific reasons for hunting mountain lions. And there's a lot of scientific reasons for not hunting them, namely their value to ecosystems and keeping those ecosystems resilient in the face of climate change. And so I think that's where we need to move towards is less hunting in general, and that'll help keep those, kittens from getting orphaned.
Thank you. Speaking of hunting, Jocelyn, what do wolverines hunt and eat?
A lot of different things. In some populations, their diet can be 70% mountain goats. They eat a lot of marmots. All the things that occur at tree line, wolverines are really tightly associated with timberline. That's where they hang out. they're primarily a scavenger, so they will scavenge over hunting, but they are able to take down ungulates. But they often find mountain goats that have been killed in an avalanche, fallen off a cliff. They eat the whole suite of voles, mice, flying squirrels, even songbirds. We've found kinglets, if you know what those are, small, very small canopy songbirds in their scats, and we don't know if those were eggs or an adult bird or a chick. Snowshoe hares is another big one, and Douglas squirrels.
Thank you. All right, Randy, this question's geared towards you. How can they learn how to spot wildlife better? And Jocelyn and Brent, you guys can chime in on this one too.
So an interesting experience I had, I grew up on the coast and I always lived someplace close to either running water or the ocean. And so I was familiar with different sounds like associated with the water or associated with, coastal birds. And I moved over to Eastern Oregon and I was living in Sumter in the Blue Mountain or in the Elkhorns. And I remember getting out of my car, and it's not that I hadn't visited there before, but it was the first time like really getting out and living in the space. And the weirdest experience that I had was that I felt like I had gone deaf because I couldn't hear anything. Now, one part of it too is that Sumter is in an area where there's not a lot of air traffic, there's not a lot of radio towers or electrical towers, there's not a lot of traffic. But the other part of it too is I couldn't hear birds. I could hear things, but it was not the same. And it took me a while to realize that the reason for that is that I'm always paying attention to the things that I'm familiar with. And even sometimes those things fade into the background. So I'm not even looking for those. So if you want to get better, one of the things I encourage people is when they get into a space, especially if it's someplace new or it's someplace that they want to learn about, take time to just be still in that space and begin observing, what do you smell? What do you see? What are some different types of plants? If you want to get better at bird watching, a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll say there's nothing interesting in my neighborhood. And I let them know, like, go sit outside and then really start looking at all of the little birds, especially in the springtime, and you'll start seeing all these colors that we don't notice because we're constantly moving around but not looking. And if you can go out multiple seasons, it's even better because you get familiar with a spot and you'll be able to tell the difference between the smells. You'll be able to smell the berries when they come in or even some of the more subtle flowers. But a lot of it takes time, and just understand that all areas are different. So what you might encounter at the coast versus in the gorge versus Southern Oregon versus, the high desert or the mountains is all going to have a very subtle different flavor or sometimes some extremes. But and if you have a notebook, take notes. But it takes time, and you'll discover things that you didn't even realize were there.
All right, I have one last question for all three of you. This has been on my mind today. But what is each of your most memorable carnivore encounter that you've had in the gorge? It could be different than your study of field. I've stumped you guys.
I saw one of the Wolverine kits in the mountains. It was kind of neat because when COVID happened, Mount Rainier closed its gates, and right before that, there'd been a landslide that closed the roads. And so this Wolverine had been born in Mount Rainier, and it had lived its entire life with almost no human visitation. So it was very curious and was not afraid of me. So I got to see the glow of its eyes, and I could really see all the hairs of its fur. It was quite a memorable encounter.
I think for me, I was in Klickitat County last summer and got to go on a tracking hike with a master tracker. And so I didn't see the animals themselves, but to just learn more about the different tracks that different animals leave and how to tell. And understanding the story that the tracks tell and the movement. And it was a lot of fun. It was really, really cool.
So the bear one was my carnivore one, but I do have one that was when I thought I was encountering a carnivore and it wasn't. And it was, and I'm afraid it's not quite the gorge either. So I'm just going to break all the rules. But I was in the Mount Adams area, and we were hiking up one of the side trails along the base, and it's a beautiful spot. You can also see pika there. But there was consistently something moving in the trees. And so I was kind of paying attention to it, and I couldn't quite get my eye on it. And it didn't seem to be bothering me. And I just was like, I'll just keep moving on ahead. And I've got another route out if for some reason I need to take that. So I'm not worried about that. But I saw another one, and I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. And so I'm keeping an eye, and I don't see anything for a while. And then, I see another one, and it's dark. Now I can actually make out a shape. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot bigger than what I thought it was. And it's a dark shape. And I'm like, this might be a bear situation. There was a lot of currants in the area, and there was some other berries. I can't remember. I think there was like some blackberries up in there. And I was like, I think it's time to leave. Whatever this is, it's weird because there's so many of them. And then, as I'm making my way down, all of a sudden, this scary dark shape goes, "Mrrr." And that was how I discovered that particular area was open range. So, yes.
Thank you all so much. Thanks again, Jocelyn, Brent, and Randy, for taking your time this evening to talk about our viewers about carnivores. And thank you to all of our viewers for watching and participating with us tonight. Those were amazing questions and a great webinar getting to know about carnivores in the gorge. Before you go, I want to let you know that this webinar is just one of many that we are going to host throughout the upcoming year. If you enjoyed this webinar, consider donating to friends by scanning the QR code to help fund our work. Right now, we're in the middle of Give Guide, which is one of our biggest fundraising campaigns of the year, so your support would mean so much to us. Give through the QR code or by visiting gorgefriends.org/giveguide. We hope to see you at our next webinar in the first few months of 2025. Keep an eye out in your emails and social media posts to learn more about future webinars and upcoming wildlife outings with friends. A reminder that a recording of this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube page tomorrow. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great night and a great holiday season.